Good evening. Maybe we can get started. I'm Greg Gillespie. I'm the president of the Westminster's Kiwanis Club. And I want to welcome all of you to tonight's session. Tonight's session is Youth Leadership Education, the Foundation of the Future. The reason we developed this topic is because, let's face it, we live in a very challenging world, and our young people are going to be facing many, many challenges throughout their lives. We hope this is a good start to develop those skills. Tonight we have two very experienced people that will give us some leadership. One is Michelle Study-Campbell. She's the Executive Director of Kiwanis Youth Programs. And Joshua Hiscock, he's a PhD, and he's a Certified Leadership Trainer. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Michelle to give us some ideas. Thank you.
So again, Michelle Study-Campbell for the recording, and I get to work with youth programs on a daily basis. And today we're going to give a little bit of a landscape of what today's youth are dealing with, some statistics from the Center for Disease CDC. We've got statistics, actually some global statistics. So many times people think, that's just a U.S. problem. You have too much social media. The truth is, these are issues that are really prevalent among teens across the globe. And so let's get started. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some global youth development statistics. There's a sharp increase in mental health stressors, increase in reports of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation in our youth, and an increase in feelings of disconnection and social isolation. So many of you probably hear social isolation, I don't bring my phone, and you think, that was the pandemic. That's when everybody just had online school in their bedroom by themselves. Everything's fine now. Well, let me tell you, it's not. Those numbers continue to go up because, imagine I have my phone. You may have 2,000 followers on TikTok or Instagram, but you're still by yourself, right? You can only share and like and comment on memes and videos and feel somewhat connected, but not truly connected. So we're losing that across society, but more prevalent in our teens. And so this is just some clip art with some big words that we're hearing a lot about: mental health, mental wellness, anxiety, depression. And so this just came out recently from the Surgeon General. If we seize this moment, step up for our children and their families in their moment of need, and lead with inclusion, kindness, and respect, we can lay the foundation for a healthier, more resilient, and more fulfilled nation. So that's U.S. specific, and it's really a call to action about stepping up and stepping into this moment and how we can support our youth. Some additional data. This was fresh data from February 23. Teen girls persistently felt sad or hopeless increased dramatically from 2011 to 21. That's a huge increase there of our young women with those feelings. And I see some of you taking some pictures. We'll get this to Art, who can get it out to all of you. Additional information, nearly 1 in 3, 30%, seriously considered attempting suicide, up nearly 60% from the last time they did this survey. 1 in 5 experienced sexual violence in the past year, up 20% since 2017 when they just started monitoring this measure. And so really the state of our youth, state of our young women is pretty tough right now. And so we're going to talk a little bit more on some statistics and then talk about some solutions. So another piece of this landscape, and this was coming out, think back to October 2020, right? You were not going to a hospital unless you were crazy ill, right? Like it had to be dire. We were in the throes of COVID-19. People were really still in their homes, not going out. An unprecedented increase in ER visits for mental health crisis. I have an 11-year-old. 5 to 11-year-olds, a 24% increase reported that April to October of ER visits for mental health issues. So that's suicidal ideation, that's cutting, that's actual self-harm. going into the ER. 31% increase in those 12 to 17-year-olds. Let me tell you, it's not slowing down. More than 1 in 3 high school students experience persistent feelings of that sadness or hopelessness. Again, over the decade-to-decade study, a 40% increase. And so many times people think, particularly in a global organization like Kiwanis, we hear so many times, oh, that's just a U.S. problem. We don't have that problem here. The problem for our teens, or the issue, is global. And so here you see it's a little bit different. It's affecting young men a little bit more so than young women in the European Union, and this is from a UNICEF study back in 21. But again, you see suicide is the second leading cause of death of teens in the EU. When you look at numbers from the Asia-Pacific region and other parts of the globe, we see similar statistics. So, what can help? How many of you in here are regular volunteers in the community? Right? That's why you're here tonight. So have you heard of a helper's high? Way back, where are my 80s babies at? Like, this came out in the 80s. I just like to say 80s babies whenever I can. So this came out in the 80s, right, when the whole volunteering kind of trend started, if you will, or grew here in the United States and abroad. And positive, when you volunteer and you give of yourself and you're part of something bigger, you get these positive feel-good brain chemicals, and it's literally a helper's high. Like, you get excited, you get energized, and you're like, ooh, I didn't want to go to that thing, but I'm so glad I'm all in. I'm going to do this next week too. It's just the best. Well, guess what? Our young people get the same thing. And so when you give of yourself and you see you're more connected to community, that helper's high kicks in, and it's a lovely recurring phenomenon. And so it actually leads to greater health and increased longevity. I did not make this up. You can Google helper's high. There's lots of studies on it, and a great natural way to get excited and feel good about what you're doing. So we like to talk about service as a solution, and this is in conjunction with our educational partners, and some people call it enrichment activities. After school activities is kind of what it used to be. And the benefits for youth is it builds those soft and hard skills. You're suddenly learning how to talk to someone you've never seen before. Somebody from a different school, you've never seen them, you break out of your shell. Right? So networking, building those connections. Also, who here's planned a volunteer activity? I thought I would see all hands up. So for you planners, you also get some hard skills, right? Time management, event planning, so forth, right? That also builds in the skill set for our youth. Boosting self-understanding and self-confidence, getting to know more about what they like, what they don't like. In a recent study of Key Club International, 89% of our participants said that their self-confidence is boosted because of Key Club. Another program we have, Key Leader. When we ask students, we do a pre and a post test, a classic pre-post, where you ask the exact same questions on day 1, minute 1, and the exact same questions at the end. And we ask them how they feel about themselves as a leader, how they feel about themselves in their community. The answers go from a 2 or a 3 up to 5, and it's a 5-point Likert scale. And that's just 2 days of community involvement and learning, and how it boosts their confidence and their perception of themselves. Connecting students to their community, right? So many times our students are reporting that they do not feel welcomed and wanted in their own schools. There was a study that was released on August 6th, 2022. It was my daughter's birthday. I was watching the Today Show, so that's why I have it memorized. And that morning, they announced a new study, and it was well over half of today's high school students do not feel welcomed and wanted in their own school community. Can you imagine showing up and doing your very best 5 days a week where you do not feel welcomed and wanted? That is heartbreaking. But we see time and time again, when we connect our students to the community, when they see something bigger than themselves, bigger than their school community, those feelings of isolation and rejection begin to fade away and lessen. It fosters a lifelong commitment to service. I know personally, in 6th grade, when I helped figure out the book drive for the Cincinnati schools, I've been volunteering ever since then. So volunteering works. I've made a job out of this. And then it develops that positive outlook on their future, and bonus, increase in physical and mental health wellness. So these are some quotes about service and how our students begin to see themselves. You know, they're self-reporting that their mental health is improving because they're part of a bigger community. They have found their crew inside their school community. Just another quote. This young person just really helped them step outside themselves. We see this time and time again. I didn't like school. I didn't have any connections. I didn't have friends. I hated going in every day. But once you find your people, once you find that bigger sense of purpose, those feelings begin to slide away. So for the community, the benefits are endless, but these are kind of the top 4. Fostering the next generation of community leaders, an increase in educational attainment. So I'm from the great state of Indiana, where we traditionally rank in the bottom 5 of educational attainment, right? That's students who stick with high school and move on to some sort of post-secondary option, be it career training, college, you name it. The increase in educational attainment hard to say fast, educational attainment for students who are more connected to their community, who are more connected to an activity within their school, skyrockets. We see it time and time again and we hear it from our teachers, our faculty advisors, from our sponsors, our principals and superintendents. The students that are more engaged in those activities, they have a better sense of place, they want to do better, they want to show up more, there's less truancy, and they are better part of the fabric of that community. And then greater civic engagement. My friend Josh is going to come up and take over and talk about his own personal experience and then working with higher ed, how this all connects. I've talked a lot about high school. We're going to talk about some other.
Absolutely. So good evening, everyone. My name is Josh Hiscock, and I am going to touch on some of the things that Michelle talked about. So first of all, why am I up here? 2 things. One, I work with youth of all ages, from high school through college, and I've done that as a leadership instructor. I work in higher education, that's my profession. Currently I work with fundraising for the University of Maryland, Baltimore. But for many years I worked in youth leadership development directly, and I still do with Kiwanis. And so let me tell you a little bit about my story, and then a little bit about what I see, and how all of what Michelle just presented really creates positive impact in the community for youth in terms of all these things and how they play out for students who go on to higher education, the military, a job in the workplace. So I'm a product of Kiwanis leadership education. I grew up in Massachusetts in a small town called Orange, and I tell everybody Orange had a slogan. It was Orange, the town with appeal. Right, so yeah, that one got a groan. But if that gives you an idea of where I grew up, that paints a picture for you. So there were 750 students in my school, high school, and that was middle school and high school combined. 750. My graduating class was 99 people. And so talk about, in a small knit space, everybody knows everything about everybody, right? It's hard to get away. And so all these things that Michelle talked about in terms of feeling like you belonged or feeling like you were welcomed, I'm one of those 80s babies. So even in the 90s, those feelings existed in schools. There was this sense of, can I really be myself? But I was involved in an organization called Key Club. And Key Club is the world's largest high school service organization that's student-led, and it's in communities around the world, including this community here. And the idea is that it's a program where students get to serve and lead, develop character, develop their leadership skills. And I truly believe it was that club in my high school that created a lot of who I am today. Michelle talked about her passion for service. For me, it was that first service project. I think it was raking leaves in someone's yard. And I grew up in New England. We have lots of leaves for months on end, right? But for me, it was doing that first service project alongside other people who also loved service. And then it was realizing, like Michelle mentioned, I could hold like an officer position, right? I could plan the next service project, and I could get more involved with other key clubs that weren't just in my own community. I could run for these positions, and I could, meet people from places where I had never been, on different parts of the state. And I grew up in a place where, I could meet people who lived in Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont. So it wasn't just my own state, it was all the states around me. And it opened up this whole world of opportunity that I didn't know existed. But talk about skill development, all those hard and soft skills. I learned how to listen. I learned how to interact and communicate with people. And these are skills that youth today in this community are learning through organizations like Key Club. And those are skills that service directly delivers. This idea of getting engaged, being involved, having opportunities to learn. And that's one of the greatest things about the work that we do. I'll share this. I've traveled around the country, around most of North America, delivering some of the curriculum for a program that Michelle referenced called Key Leader. It's a leadership weekend experience. And if you could imagine someone, maybe yourself, when you're 14 or 15 years old, showing up with a lot of people you don't know, kind of a room like this. Imagine, you come in, people are from different towns and different cities, different high schools, and you're by yourself. But imagine being in a room of people who love and care about service, who want to be leaders, who don't care where you're from. They embrace you and they bring you in and they ask you more about you, and they share about themselves, and they invite you to do activities together or to eat at a lunch together. And that's the environment we create in our Kiwanis leadership programs. People who are passionate coming together to learn together, to accept who they are. The one thing I love, I hated the statistic about people not feeling comfortable in their own school, but I love that Kiwanis creates opportunities for people to come together, and you can be yourself in a group of strangers. They don't know you. You can be your authentic self. And we see students all the time excel at being who they are when they come into these leadership programs and opportunities. And imagine that being yourself, that's the easiest thing to be, right? You don't have to pretend to be something else or someone else. And that's where our students really grow and excel. So the skills that they gain, they go to higher education. A lot of the things that people learn in Key Club or in Key Leader, they can talk about that on a college application. They can talk about that in a college interview. When they get to college, they can put that to work in maybe a part-time job. They can put that to work in an opportunity to engage in a club or organization. And so the skills that are developed in that first, experience in high school, they translate perfectly to being more engaged later on in college or beyond. I'll share this one last story before I think we'll probably take some questions and probably engage with the group. We do an activity in our Key Leader program. And I want you to think about it. We're not going to do it, obviously, but think about if you turned to the person next to you. And we do an activity where for 2 minutes, one person gets to speak. And for 2 full minutes, the person who's listening cannot say a word. You can't mutter, you can't even say, uh-huh, or oh. You simply have to be quiet. But for 2 minutes, someone gets to focus on what you're actually saying. And then we flip it around. And the person who is speaking gets to listen. The person who is listening gets their 2 minutes to talk. And when that activity is done, the things that our students can repeat about what someone said back to them, the clarity, they truly heard what someone said. They felt heard. They felt like somebody finally listened to them. That's a great skill, listening. Imagine if our world leaders listened to each other. We always say in our Key Leader program, listening is not waiting for your turn to talk. And so these are the types of skills that Kiwanis programs are instilling in our youth. And imagine taking that skill back to your high school or to college or to a job. That listening, that engaging, it makes a huge difference in the lives of our students. They really do change through their involvement in leadership programming. And some of those statistics that Michelle presented, service is a solution. Getting involved in these programs can be a way to show that people care, that you can develop yourself, that you can have these opportunities. And in some cases, that might help to mitigate some of the risks that we're seeing in terms of behaviors that youth exhibit or feelings that come on. And so truly, service and leadership are a solution to a lot of what we're facing today. And so I think that the programs that Kiwanis offers in this community and that Kiwanis will continue to offer in this community can make a real difference for youth. And I think that involvement, the positive youth, the mentors that youth have, that positive youth development, seeing adults who care, all of that plays into being a really successful leader as an individual, and that carries through to the college environment as well. So with that, I'm just wondering, I kind of just want to do a quick question. This is a show of hands, kind of low risk, how many people were involved either in high school or college at some point in their life in an activity where they feel like their involvement helped them grow as an individual? So like you're better because you were involved in something, okay? For some people, it's their church or faith community. It could be a community service organization. It could be any number of things. But that's the sort of experience we want every youth to have. We want everyone to say they were in an activity where they feel like they're a better, stronger leader because of that activity. And that's the goal we have, because I think we've seen it in our college students and in our adults. Those experiences really can change the trajectory of someone's life. I'm my small town of Orange, Massachusetts. I went to school in D.C. I stayed in the D.C. area. I have a PhD now. I get to travel around and teach youth leadership development skills and help facilitate. It can really make a difference, and it can really change the trajectory of where you're headed just by getting involved to that first service project.
We hope that maybe you have some questions for Josh and Michelle, so if you have a question, head up to the microphone. Would be helpful because we're recording this for our community media center, and maybe we can have a little bit of a discussion on some of the points.
People have thoughts on what you heard, if there was a reaction to something that Michelle presented, or a question, anything is okay.
You could start out by trying to elucidate what are the causes for anxiety and depression among the children. You're suggesting one treatment option, but why are these kids so stressed? Why are they so depressed?
So the question was, I'll repeat it for the recording, is what is some of the causation behind the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, some of the diagnoses that are more prevalent now than they have been. And I think it's multiple things. Our students today, I would gather, are a little bit overscheduled, which brings some stress to it. I also believe that, I hope the Google police do not come after me, but social media has a lot of positives. It also has some negatives. Who here has, sat down on a Saturday morning without too many things on your schedule and open the Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, for those who are 80s babies or younger, and suddenly a couple hours goes by? Like, my husband calls it doom scrolling, like you just can't stop. Again, you feel connected to tens of thousands of people because you all like the same thing, you're all watching the same videos, but there's not that true connection, right? So I think that's a huge part of it. I also believe that this generation is much more comfortable talking about stressors and anxiety, right? There's many a generation that would have never said, I'm too stressed, I'm anxious. Like, they would have never verbalized that. You just kind of like sucked it up and carried on. I think that was a saying in my household. Suck it up and move on. But today's youth are much more comfortable talking about it. I do think that the dramatic accelerated change with social media and how people are living kind of connected but still isolated, right? Plays a huge part in that. I also think that there's a group of our students and our youth that on the anxiety and stress part are completely overscheduled, right? And you got something every single night. You might get to your homework at 8 or 9 o'clock. Then you've got 3 hours of homework. You get 6 hours of sleep and you're back at it again. That's not healthy for developing brains, and that's something that as a community we need to take a look at. I know I'm talking about additional activities and enrichment, but trying to find that balance. So those are top of mind. And let me state, I am not a clinician. I'm more of an administrator of programs. So
I'll add one that I think Michelle sort of alluded to, but I'll name it, and it's cyberbullying, right? And I'll say basically it's tied to social media. A lot of the youth that I work with say, it's easy to hide behind social media because you're not saying it to someone's face. There's a sort of a bit of a courage to typing something about someone, especially when you might be able to remain anonymous. That creates a lot of stress and anxiety. When you post a photo and you're afraid of how people might react to it. Might people say, "Oh, you look so ugly" or something? People are very nervous. Youth are very nervous about putting themselves out there because people might attack you online in a way that's creates anxiety, creates stress, and then might cause you to feel a certain way. And I think that's more prevalent now more than ever with social media because there are so many platforms. Michelle just mentioned a few. Right.
So if you,
or it looks very different today than it used to.
right. So if you had an arch nemesis on the playground at school, you could at least escape that at 3:05 p.m. and not have to deal with it again until tomorrow, the next day at 8. But now you've got it just stalking you, and you can't escape it. And students make the Finsta accounts, the fake Insta accounts, so then they can again hide behind another layer. So that's the cyberbullying. Social media in general has some total positives, but there's also a lot of negatives to that. So as parents, as concerned citizens, maybe a couple grandparents in the room, I think we have an obligation and a duty to kind of help monitor that for our students. Excellent point.
You mentioned that social media has some positives. What are they?
Do you want to take it? Okay.
So there's certainly a couple. I'll look at it from both a personal and an organizational perspective. One is, how did some of you learn about tonight's event here, right? Some of you might have seen a post on Facebook or on some other social media site. So for a lot of our youth, it's a way to amplify the good things they're doing. Come to my organization's bake sale. Check out the photos from this service project I did. So there's a lot of positives to how you can use social media for promotion or for sharing the good things that are happening. And for some people, they use it as a bit of a life chronicle, right? Photos of great memories and trips and things that they've done because that the internet's permanent, right? It's there. So they know it's a place to showcase, look at my family vacation or look at this great time I had at homecoming or prom. So I think that I'll end with this. It's a connection opportunity. So as much as we say connection can be isolating, for some people, social media is a connection to people who have shared interests, that have common bonds, and they may not live down the street from you, they may live halfway across the world, but social media connects you. And for some people who aren't happy where they are, that's the way to find the people who make you happy. And so those are some things that I think are positives of social media.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that ability to connect, you might find a gaming friend across the globe that you connect with, but I think where it becomes challenging is when it's your only connection, it's your only social outlet. And I think that's, again, is concerned community members and parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc., helping balance the online community with real community is the key. Okay. Did I see a hand back there? Maybe it was a stretch. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to face my fear and go to the microphone.
Hello. I am not an 80s baby. I missed that boat by maybe 20 years. But when I was growing up, you learned volunteerism and service, usually through your parents or your community. I'm just wondering if the studies are showing that parents today are less equipped to model that for their kids, and that's why we're talking about all these other options for how we can foster it in our youth. So what's the role that parents play in today's world?
That's a great question. Certainly coming out of the pandemic, the number of volunteer hours and people being engaged in organizations that do, that their main focus is service, those numbers are going down. But those numbers have been going down, probably the last 20 years, right? Bowling alone. Yep. And so those numbers have been going down. Key Club International, and timeout, how many people here are with Kiwanis? Okay, good. Okay, perfect. I was afraid I was going too deep on Kiwanis, but not possible with this crowd. So Key Club International has been around for 100 years, right? So we're celebrating our 100th on March 23rd, 2025. We have been playing a role in other organizations in trying to help parents and churches and other community organizations help a new generation tap into service. And so I think parents today, many are working multiple jobs, and volunteering is probably at the bottom of it's a get to do, not a have to do, is what I like to say. And not everybody has the luxury of time and resources to take their children volunteering and to tap into a community event. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity, particularly in Key Club, and you and I have discussed this, of connecting those parents to opportunities as well. And I think that there's opportunities there that haven't been fully explored. So, did that answer your question? Yes.
I'm Mike McMullen from the Carroll County Chamber. I think that young folks that have got kids are so insanely busy trying to buy food and put a roof over their head. I've got 4 kids and 13 grandkids. And none of my kids are just with all kinds of extra time, except one son who works in a church. So it kind of lends to being able to do all this stuff. So there's a lot of things that we have to overcome. And I think for young people to get them involved, one of the key things is it's got to be fun. Yeah. And you got to pry them away from these cell phones that are addictive. It's hard to get them to, especially kids. They're so consumed by that, by what everybody, if you think back, we all worried so much what folks think about us. Even now it's like, oh, do folks, so with kids, to be able to do what you want to do here, you've got to find a way to get them away from cell phones. And if you can find that, you could patent it and be like multi-millionaires because they're all addicted. So that's the big challenge, okay? Exactly. I'll leave that to you.
No, absolutely. And
You've got a PhD, so you ought to be able to do it.
I'm on the case. But I think that to the point that's made there is that, we have, kind of synthesizing a few of these comments, our youth are so involved and so busy. And then that translates directly when they go either to college or join the military or get a job. Like, life never becomes less busy, right? Very few people, even in I've met some of the busiest people I know are retired. Retired people are some of the busiest people I know. So I truly believe that incredible busyness exists. What we have to do is create the value proposition for why leadership development, community service is important to add to that full plate, right? If your life is a pie chart, there's always a little sliver of the pie chart that is optional, right? How do you want to fill that little sliver? We just need to show our youth and our college students and members of our community that service is worth filling that little piece of the pie chart because of that helper's high, because of what it does to better the community, what it does to create a legacy for our children or grandchildren or neighbors or nieces or nephews or whomever. We just need to talk about that value proposition. Because I agree, there is no magic wand to wave to get people to put their cell phones down. But that engagement that keeps coming up over and over, for me, that's what I see, right? So when we do these key leader events, they're typically at a camp environment. So think the woods. And what's great about the woods, still to this day, there's not always a cell phone signal. The first thing the kids do when they get to camp is they usually do this. They hold the phone up, they're searching for the signal, they ask you for the Wi-Fi password, which we politely decline to give them, and then they have to talk to each other. They have to then realize, well, I don't have my phone, what do I have? Oh wait, my voice. And that's when they start to meet the people that they're going to be in a cabin or bunk with, or the people that they're going to eat dinner with. In some ways, it's a kind of a forced situation, but it's that engagement. And then once they start, I'll tell you, they don't look for their phones the rest of the weekend, because they don't need their phones, because they've got Art, or they've got Donna, or they've got Vicky, and they look for them. They want to go sit next to them. They want to be part of those activities together. When they have free time, they search them out. And so it's creating the opportunity in the environment where the phones go down for a while to remind people that people lived a long time without cell phones, and they engaged face-to-face for a long time. So it really does work. And even youth today, college students are the same way. When you put them in that environment, some students really thrive. They forget how good they are at talking with people and engaging. You just need to create those opportunities for that.
A good friend of mine from New York, we moved out to New York about 5 years ago. A good friend of mine had a basket at the front door. His children, his grandchildren, any visitors come in, the cell phone goes in the basket before you take 2 steps in the house. That's good. Don't touch it till you leave.
Sure.
You're here to visit me.
Right. And again, we don't. We're vilifying cell phones a little bit, but appropriately so when it comes to engagement and leadership. There's a place for a balance. Yeah. Right? Because for some students, remember, we just talked, that phone is their connection to people who might love them or care about them or understand them. So for some people, the idea of giving that up is giving up that sense of positive connection. But it's about the balance, right? It's about making sure that we're not doing the doom scrolling. And again, I talk to college students about this all the time because, if you think people are critical of you in high school, wait till you get to college, right? There's a whole nother level of people who are critical and then searching for jobs and getting rejections or getting acceptances and interviews or not interviews. The stress doesn't end, but it's helping people understand that there's a balance in everything. And that's part of what we talk about in leadership development for youth and for young adults that are in college as you prepare for the military or for your first job. It's about finding that balance that works for you, that provides you what you need to feel that you're growing and developing positively. And so that's why we offer programs, because it gives students those hard skills, those soft skills that they can then put into practice, just like I did and just like many of you did as well.
All right, any additional questions? Excellent, this side of the room. You've been underrepresented.
Well, here we go. I'm just curious, since you both have been in this industry for a long time, what are some ways you're seeing leadership education evolve?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I will say I'm always shocked when I work with youth and see some of the exact same things that I did in junior high and high school are still happening, right? So a lot actually hasn't changed, but I do think thanks to technology, thanks to different ways to reach out, right? So just on Friday, I was with my Builders Club. I'm not a faculty advisor. I have a job at Kiwanis. I'm a Kiwanis advisor to a Builders Club. And we were able to connect with Builders Club members around the globe on Friday at noon. And so we had our global kickoff, and we had students from all over the place. So I think that's a big thing, that they're able to connect, right? So that's a positive thing on technology. I think, too, like what we saw during the pandemic is there are abilities to meet anytime, any place, anywhere, right? And so you don't always, like if transportation is a constraint, if, that time-space continuum just doesn't give you the time to drive across town for a half-hour meeting, there's an opportunity even for young students to connect via Zoom and still learn about service and impact. I think one thing that I see in our programs is like with UNICEF USA, we're able now to take virtual tours of our projects in Zambia and the Côte d'Ivoire. I always get nervous on that one. But so I think that there's a whole access to greater knowledge, greater connection, and then there's also the old tried and true, icebreakers and getting to know each other that way. So
I think just to speak to to this, I think I see that students are still very hesitant to do in-person activities because of that social anxiety and some of the pieces they bring into that space. But I do find that students, once they get into the environment and are put into icebreakers or team builders and given chances to engage with each other, they really do warm up. I mean, if you see a student come to an event on a Friday afternoon, a weekend event, how they leave on Sunday, almost 99% of the time, they're a changed individual. So those in-person opportunities to engage, I think are Michelle was kind of alluding to this, the ones that have always been there, but they're still very impactful. But I will say, asynchronous learning, the idea of like the Global Leadership Certificate, programs where you're able to learn on your own pace. There's a lesson that you can log into and do. I know a lot of that was very prevalent during the pandemic when people were doing their own education for public schools. But there is a lot of opportunity for students because that creates for different learners the chance to self-pace themselves. If they're better in the morning versus nighttime, they can engage with the material in a way that fits best for them. And I do find working with my college student populations that I talk to, they love the in-person, but they love the idea of asynchronous because for some of them they work. And so the idea of doing something on the nights and weekends when they're not working, or vice versa, they work nights and weekends, so they have daytime hours available, but that's not always when a leadership seminar is happening. So creating online learning opportunities that really fit everybody's individual needs, I think that's certainly prevalent now, and I think that's going to be where we see more demand, because that's going to help deliver exactly what people want in the way they learn best, which is really what we're trying to achieve. So.
The Netflix.
Yes, right, yeah, exactly. The Netflix, the model of like a menu of what do I want, and then it's on demand, which I think is what's most important.
Yeah. Good question.
I'll ask you one more and then I'll be quiet. A couple of things you're saying seem a little fuzzy to me. One thing you're saying is that the incidence of depression and suicide attempts are going up. But at the same time, this is the same time when the frequency and the use of these devices for talking to each other is also going up. So whether it's happening in a parallel fashion or if there's a cause and effect relationship, that's sort of be looked at. That's one part of it. Second thing is to look at the people who are trying to take their lives and are overstressed in that. What are their situations? I mean, not being involved, I assume that their families are pushing them too hard, or they come from a negative environment. So you would want to see more and more is what are the ideological causes for them to react that way. And the third thing, it would be very good for Kiwanis to do statistics and find out whether or not, if they do join key clubs and stuff, whether or not, but it's self-selected. It may well be that the person who had never dreamed of committing suicide is the same person that would want to join a group. But I'm talking about these kids. I always worry about the kids at the bottom of the list. The kids that don't have families and they don't have parental support and they're in poverty and all that. Kiwanis needs to get those people involved and to see whether or not it helps.
All right, so that's a lot to unpack there. There's 5 questions in your last question, okay? So we will do our best. So I think a couple of things. Mental health is individual. We certainly can look at causation, right? So we see the increased amount of self-professed isolation, right? Isolation, a lot of times, sometimes, well, again, not a clinician. Isolation can lead to depression or anxiety. Those thoughts can lead to the suicidal ideation and then the suicidal attempts, right? So it's kind of a spectrum. A lot of times you will see students who fit kind of a profile, right? They didn't have any friends. They don't have the connections. Mom and dad, they'll be okay. They're just going through a rough spot. They're the kiddo that throws off their backpack when they hit the door, goes to their room, and you never see them again until the next morning, right? They're not engaged at home. They're not engaged after school. I'm sure you would hear a teacher or a guidance counselor or a trusted adult say that they're not engaged in school, right? So there's one thing that kind of sounds like an after-school special, right? You've also got the complete and opposite flip side. You have star athletes who are straight A, likely going to a top university, like the University of Maryland, and they also are overstressed, anxious, suicidal ideation, and take an attempt on their life. You have students who look, from the outside that they have it all, but they're getting cyberbullied by so-called friends on a regular basis, so far that they can't take it anymore, they don't see a way out, and they take their lives. And so just like everyone in this room, and your mental health is different and unique to you and your experiences, it's hard to paint a broad swath on suicidal ideation and attempts as to their why. But as we do see an increase in these numbers, right? Also, I would say that, again, going back to students today are much more comfortable, this is a good thing, in talking about their feelings, their mental health, how they feel overwhelmed, what's too much, right? This is a good part of this. Now we have to bring solutions in addition to what we're talking about here today to help our students navigate this. Another piece that we haven't really touched on from a mental health perspective is the rapid rate of change. I mean, 2 years ago, you couldn't get AI to write your term paper. Now you're figuring out how to use AI, but not use AI and not get in trouble, right? So this generation, Gen Alpha, I'm raising one right now, is experiencing the greatest frequency of change and accelerated change than any other generation before. And so that can be overwhelming to some, right? So we're looking at multiple, it's very layered effects for mental wellness and mental health. So I maybe got 2 of your questions. What are we missing?
I'll add 2 things. One I think might address one of the pieces that Dr. Bob was alluding to. First of all, there's these funny internet memes about like, I'm tired from experiencing the most recent unprecedented like life event, right? Like literally to the point Michelle made, like we in the past probably 2 years have all experienced, once in a lifetime, extreme unprecedented life events. And that's kind of like the everyday, it seems like, for our youth. And think back to like when maybe you had a once in a generation unprecedented event, but now we're looking at that being like a weekly or monthly thing, certainly an annual thing, it feels like. So I think that creates a whole lot of stress and pressure that has not really been measured or tested scientifically in the way it used to be. We haven't had that level. A pandemic in and of itself is something that we will for centuries be looking back at what effect that had. Think back to then also September 11th and all these other major life events. We don't know the long-term effect of some of that. If anybody wants to go to sleep later, I'll tell you about my master's thesis, which was all about how the traumatic events of September 11th, and if you lived here in Maryland, you might remember very devastating tornadoes that hit like La Plata and College Park about a month after September 11th. I did a study on the University of Maryland campus about how that affected the first year experience of students. And overwhelmingly, the statistics, I surveyed them 4 years after the events, it brought people together as a community in ways that no one ever anticipated. Events that you think would send people to their proverbial corners brought people together. So we're always going to have to see how these events impact the students we're working with. And it's going to really be a long time before we know correlation and causation. But what I can say is this. I know for a fact, and I will say this, every student who participates in a leadership development activity gets something out of it. So to Dr. Bob's point about how do we get all students from every walk of life involved, whether you're the A+ student or the not A+ student, how do we get everybody to engage? It's through making sure opportunities exist, to making sure the resources exist to get individuals connected to those programs, whether it's just encouragement, financial assistance, whatever the case may be. And then it's the care and follow through to make sure that students participate. And then asking how it went. In higher ed, there's this thing called an IEO model. The I is input, the E is experience, and the O is outcome. We all have inputs, who we are as individuals, our social identities, our experiences. We bring that to every experience. The experience is something that we engage in, and it tries to morph us and change us, but it produces an outcome. So to Dr. Bob's point, students come in at the top of the class, the bottom of the class, everywhere in between, from all different types of lifestyles and socioeconomic backgrounds. Whoever you are as an individual, that's your input. We control the experience. We make sure that there's an experience to be had, be it a key leader event, a key club to belong to, some sort of other community leadership event. We control the experience and making sure that students get to have the experience, because the outcome is what we're trying to influence. We're trying to help students be better, stronger, more autonomous leaders to grow in some way, because that's what's going to change the world. Because these are not the leaders of tomorrow, right? Our students are the leaders of today. We sometimes talk about this, the next generation, they're leading today. We need them to lead today, because if not them, who? And if not now, when? Right? Like, that's the question. So we need to create these experiences to allow for that growth. And so that, I think, touches a little bit on the how do we get more people involved. It's all of us. It's our responsibility to create these opportunities. And I think that's really fun and amazing that we have that chance.
And as we bring more people in, I just want to hit on this again. Over 90% of our students say that Key Club is where they feel welcomed and wanted in their school community. And I do know one question we didn't get answered, and that was about data. And we have, and again, it's self-reported, it's a lot of anecdotal quotes, but we do get into this in our survey and asking our students about just a pulse check. How's your mental wellness, right? How's your mental health? And this is the first year that we asked that question. And I can tell you that when they answered that question, it was about 86% of students said that their mental wellness, they felt positive. And so that's from our Key Club population. And we're starting to dig a little bit deeper into that. Certainly our program's not science-based or evidence-based, but I think there's room for that in this work. And that certainly, building on the great work from the 80s on the Helpers High, I think we can advance this and show that true connection to the benefits of volunteering. So there's cookies in the back. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions all day, but I don't want to keep you from the cookies. Thank you all so much.
Before I turn it back to Greg, President Greg, for closing, I would like to thank you for coming. I want to thank Josh Hitchcock and Michelle Study-Campbell for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure having them here. I'd also like to send a thank you to Glenn and Rebecca Baer, who helped finance this forum this evening, and we hope that this is a kickoff. This is our first attempt at this, so we're going to try to continue with this during the year and get some other topics. So we hope you'll take away from this some good points and help us improve the forums as they come up throughout the year. President Gregg.
I just want to follow up on Art's comments. This is this is the first of 4 forums. The next forum will be December 3rd. The topic will be early childhood literacy and an investment in the future. So we hope that you'll take time out of your schedule on December 3rd to meet with us again. And I hope you've enjoyed tonight's event and look forward to seeing you in December. Take care.